Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest for today is Peter DiGangi. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a great opportunity to talk to your subscribers and viewers, so appreciate it so much.
I meant to ask you one thing before the show that I forgot, and that is, do you have a copy of the book right there with you?
Do.
Okay. Peter is the author of the book Dying for the Faith. And it was endorsed by Dr. Richard Carrier. And this is what Dr. Carrier had to say about his book. It's speculative, it's fiction, it's a story, but it will force you to rethink why Christianity began and became what the Gospels made it into. DiGangi did a lot of research and consultation with experts on this novel to explore what the earliest Christian authors might have actually been thinking. Could some of this have really happened? Maybe. I think he's at least hit upon some telling truths, making this well worth a read and a ponder.
Yeah.
With that endorsement, let's start in and first tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to write this book.
Absolutely. So I could talk about this for an hour in itself. So if I go beyond too far, let me know. But was born and raised a Catholic, one of 7 kids, Irish Catholic family here in the Boston area. And I was always curious. I definitely had some questions that I felt weren't answered adequately. I can remember when I was, I want to say 7 or 8 years old, Jesus Christ Superstar came out, the album, and the Broadway show, and then the movie. And I remember listening to that, and I really loved the music, right? But kind of lost track of it for so many years. And then in college, I listened to it again and kind of heard it from a completely different perspective.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, I was like, holy cow, this is way more political than I thought, right? And I remember listening to I Don't Know How to Love Him by Mary Magdalene. And all of a sudden, I thought, gee, did Jesus ever did Jesus ever get laid? I swear to God, I thought that. And then I was off to the races in terms of my skepticism. I remember taking a class that same semester in college called Atheism and Belief that was taught by a former Jesuit priest for 27 years who became an atheist. They tried to fire him and they couldn't.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. I went to Fairfield University in Connecticut. It's a Jesuit university. And they couldn't fire him because you can't discriminate against somebody for their religious beliefs. So it was an easy A, the course.
Well, I was going to say, did he have tenure? Was it that he had tenure?
Oh, yeah. He had been a priest for 27 years or something like that before they tried.
Well, had he been a professor that long?
I don't know that. I suspect so. But yeah, that's a good question. But either way, they couldn't get rid of him, and everyone wanted to take his course because it was an easy A, But I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. And again, it fed my skepticism. I think I would describe myself these days as I would say kind of a deist / agnostic.
Okay.
So I only sort of discovered what deism is all about 10 years ago when I read a book called Nature's God. Have you ever heard of this?
I have not, but the term nature's God, appears in the Declaration of Independence.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of controversy about that phrase right now.
And so that book is about the founding fathers and the whole point of, the First Amendment. And, we're not a Jesuit, we're not a Christian nation. We were not founded on Christian values. And they specifically say that in the Constitution. So that again got my wheels turning. Certainly the Da Vinci Code. I'm sure you've seen that movie or read that book or both. I remember when that scene where what's his name, Ian McKellen is doing the power presentation for Tom Hanks and the woman, Audrey Tutu, right? They have the Da Vinci's Last Supper up there, and he shows all that. And he talks about the Nicene Conference where they actually voted on whether Jesus was divine.
Mm-hmm.
And the woman says, wait a second. So he says they took a vote, and the woman says, are you kidding me? They took a vote? And Tom Hanks's character says, he's exaggerating. I thought, exaggerate? Like, that was the first time I Googled something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could this possibly be true? That so I just had believed what I had been told to a certain extent. Then I started to get skeptical, but I had no idea, and I don't think many people have any idea about the real origins and how much things evolved over time before it became the state religion of the Roman Empire, and I saw Dr. Carrier on a lecture about science in the Greco-Roman Empire. And once this was on YouTube, once that was over, the next thing that popped up was another lecture of his called Why Invent the Jesus? And I watched that. And then I bought his book. I'm sure you viewers will be familiar with this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that really just blew my mind. It's a textbook. I mean, it's not an easy read. You can't listen to that in the car, right?
Yep.
Because it took me probably 10 months to digest all that. And like, holy cow, is this possible that this is true? And then it was 4 or 5 years later where I got the idea to write the book. And it was basically chapter 12 of his book. He says somewhere in conclusion, if this is true, that he's a mythological character, then how would this have happened? And that was kind of my template from my book. So I sort of start with, as you know, like Paul's conversion, which is probably fueled by some guilt about being complicit in Stephen's martyrdom.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I think, in my opinion, I really took some liberties there because I don't think Acts of the Apostles is true. So I kind of took that part from Acts, but I don't know that really happened.
No, and you're not alone. Bart Ehrman thinks that, there's so much differentiation between what Acts has Paul saying and what is in what are considered the authentic letters of Paul, that Acts cannot possibly be historical. It can't possibly be, accurately representing what Paul had to say.
Correct. Yeah. And it's funny how much the mythicists and the historicists agree on things, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it comes really down to like a matter of interpreting, what the evidence is or isn't, So that's a good example right there of that difference in, because he's definitely a historicist, Bart Ehrman, right?
Yes, very definitely. Yeah, he and Richard Carrier have had some sharp disagreements.
Yes,
Put it mildly.
Exactly. And I reached out to Dr. Carrier probably about 30-40 pages into my book. At that time it was completely different than the finished product.
Mm-hmm.
But he was very complimentary. Like, I like where this is going. I really think you're onto something. So then I reached out months later to a Dr. Robin Walsh, and she wrote The Origins of Early Christian Literature. And she was also very complimentary, like, hey, I really think you are onto something here, even though, again, I've always been amazed at her willingness to help me, given the fact that she's on the other side of the debate. But I don't know if you've read how often Carrier kind of quotes her, because her book is about how the Gospels drew very heavily from Greek and Roman literature, like Homer, the Odyssey, the Iliad, Virgil, all of that stuff. So I definitely incorporated that into my story. I kind of created two characters. One is Luke, who becomes Luke, the Gospel of Luke. And the other is a woman, a female character named Luchia, and she kind of represents Carrier, like the mythicist.
Oh, okay. I'm going to stop you right there for one reason, and that is I have a list of questions that I was going to questions and comments about the book.
Go ahead.
And my first one is about the character of Luchia. And that is, she is the character that I was most impressed with in the book. And I was so impressed that a male author was so able to pick up on the frustration of being female and being just as capable and just as intelligent, and in fact more intelligent than any man in the room, and having to pretend that you are not so. And I was so impressed with the depth of her character, of having to feign ignorance for the benefit of the men.
Yeah. So I have to tell you, I'm so pleased that you found that to be true. And Dr. Carrier said at one time later on in the process that, you know, it's interesting how little things have changed, you know, in some ways, right? Yeah. So, I mean, it's not that they haven't changed at all, but certainly within the Catholic Church, it hasn't changed much, you know?
Well, and right now the U.S. government is trying to erase women. You know, they're scrubbing women from the archives of Arlington Cemetery. You know, there was a huge backlash when they did that, and then they put them back. They took the website about Harriet Tubman down, and you know, there were people that noticed, and there was huge backlash. They put her back. But Black people and women, they are trying to scrub us from history.
Yeah. So it goes back a long, long way. But it's funny. I've gotten some very positive feedback about Luchia. And Luchia and Luke are the same name. One's female, one's male. And it means light. So I'm trying to shed some light. You know, some of my character names have that kind of intended, you know, interpretation in there. But others, I don't know if you remember Saskia and Ascula. Do you remember those characters? No?
No, but I'm guessing that they were modeled after Priscilla and Aquila because they sound so similar.
No, they were my daughter's imaginary friends when she was 4 or 5 years old.
Oh, okay. Very good.
I put those in there hoping people would try to find some hidden meaning in there, but there isn't, unless there is in my daughter's imaginary friends from her childhood. But I just thought the names were so funny and so cool. So
well, so many people have the same imaginary friend right now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I don't want to, as you said earlier, I don't want to give away too much, but I basically covered Saul's conversion and then the Apostolic Council. I kind of threw in a joke there. I don't know if you got to this or if you remember it, you know, that wouldn't it be something if the challenge wasn't so much about circumcision, but having to give up bacon for the rest of your life, you know?
I actually already gave up bacon.
Oh, no kidding. I could never do that, you know?
I gave up bacon because of the salt content.
Yeah, that's what makes it so delicious, though. But that's one little tiny joke. I tried to pepper some humor in there, and a lot of people seem to appreciate it. But then I had, you know, the composition of Luke's gospel, and some very interesting conversations I had with my editorial consultants that dovetailed very nicely into some of the ways that Luke's gospel differed from Mark's and Matthew's. So we would have a conversation and I would think about, maybe I should try this. And then I would look, and Luke's gospel did exactly what rectified the issue. I don't want to give too much away. But one in particular, I think, I think I can share that Luchia, the woman, is asking Luke, like, what's up with all these gods having sex with mortal women to have children? And Luke's like, what are you talking about? And she mentions Apollo and Zeus, and then, Achilles was the child of, I forget who, right? And like, how is that different from God having, Mary be the handmaiden of, the Lord to have Jesus, So again, if in the context of what was going on in first century and second century Judea and Rome, it sheds a lot of light on these stories when you understand how some of the other stories about some of the other gods, and even if they weren't gods, they were heroes who were sort of made into gods. It's kind of easier to understand that mythicist argument in the context of what was going on around the Roman Empire at the time.
I'm going to stop you for just a moment to let people know that a link to the Amazon copy of the book, to where you can buy the book on Amazon, is in the description. And I have also just pinned it in the chat. So if you want to pick up a copy of the book, it is available on Amazon. I got the Kindle copy. It gave me the copy for free.
So you must be a member?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the paperback is $18. I'm definitely a paperback. I prefer a hard copy. My wife has a Kindle. I've read books on Kindle, but I feel like it's almost the same as we were talking earlier about listening on tape. I don't feel like I can retain it as well if I read it on Kindle. Do you find that to be the case? No?
I don't have a problem with reading it on Kindle.
Yeah. I enjoy it. I just feel like I don't retain it as much.
Yeah, I don't feel that way about Kindle. One thing about me that's a little different is I changed the way I read when I went to law school, and in the opposite way that you might expect, because I used to read at what most people would consider a normal pace. But when I started law school and we had to read 300 pages a day, I realized there was no time to ever reread anything. So I slowed down the pace at which I read, but I make sure that I'm retaining everything. And so, I read a little bit slower than most people do, but I do have a better retention rate for that reason.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was kind of brushing up on Carrier's book, in preparation for this. And I read it back in 2017 or 18, I want to say. And again, I think I told you it took me like 10 months, because I would read it and go, no way, and put it down for like a few days. And then like, this can't be true. And then I'd go back and I was, I had my kids were, I think I was still coaching one of my son's soccer team at that time. And I was very much busier than I am now. We're empty nesters now. But then I started to reread it again in 22 when I started to write my book. And I couldn't believe how much I forgot in those 4 years, And I had a similar experience with Lord of the Rings, which is like 1,000 pages, right? I read that in the early 2000s. And then 4 or 5 years later, I started reading it to my kids, right? Like before they went to bed. And as I'm going through it, again, it was 4 or 5 years later. I couldn't believe how much I had forgotten. Well, I had 2 bookmarks because when the kids would go to sleep, I would continue reading. And so by the time I finished myself, I read it in, say, 3 months. For me, it took, say, 6 or 8 or 10 months to read it to them. As I got to the end reading with them, I couldn't believe how much I forgot from just 2 or 3 months earlier. Like, how did and I had seen the movies and all that. So kind of
the movies are a little different.
Right. No, 100%. But to your point about in law, getting your law degree,
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think I could ever be a lawyer because there's just so much I know I would have forgotten unless I continue to
Well,
read.
it's actually not true anymore. After I turned 50, my memory started to go. And after I turned 60, it started going even more.
Yeah.
And it's easier for me to remember something that happened 30 years ago than it is for me to remember what happened 2 days ago.
Yeah. Isn't that true? Yep. I hear you. Yep. All right. So one other aspect of the book that I think I want to discuss, that I think hopefully some of your viewers will appreciate is, I got to a certain point working with Dr. Carrier and Dr. Walsh, and I had just kind of thrown in a comment. I think I can share this. Where one of the characters, I had some I had like 2 chapters set in modern times. Because if this is true that he was a mythological character, who really cares other than people who are already interested in that topic?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to explain why I was writing in English, right? Instead of Greek or Latin or Hebrew or Aramaic, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was getting a lot of feedback from my editors. Oh, this sounds too modern. This sounds too contemporary. So I wrote this one chapter at the beginning about a bunch of people hanging around the fireplace.
Eating
and one
s'mores.
of them, say again?
Eating s'mores.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. You appreciate that, huh?
Yep. I love s'mores.
Yeah, good.
Although I've never tried them with both chocolate and Nutella.
Right.
I've
Yeah.
used one or the other, but never both.
That's my innovation, right? We call them Italian s'mores. So that was a later edition. What happened was, in the original version of that first chapter, it was just, hey, I was standing in line and I read an article about the authentics and I couldn't believe it, And so that was all basically to sort of explain why I'm writing in English. And then I kind of summed up at the end. I had a final chapter where it was like those same people, after the whole story goes through, those same people are now summing up, like who cares? And that's where I tried to say, kind of belief in a Santa Claus, if we can't figure out a better way to make our decisions as a culture, as a civilization, other than I had a dream and he told me what to do, I think we're in for some tough times. But then I reached out to a legitimate editor who's not part of the whole biblical, discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, get rid of all that stuff. It does nothing to advance the story. And her quote was, in her summary editorial letter was, she said, those 2 chapters can be summed up with, I believe this. And then the other character says, oh yeah, well, here's what I believe. Yum, cookies. Because of So I said, all right, I need to have something else compelling to bring this, fabrication into modern times. And so I added a whole storyline about the pedophile priest scandal with the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And so I think some people will find that disturbing, but also compelling. One of my personal editors, who's a friend, was shocked. And I said, should I take it out? And she's like, absolutely not. Like, that was a horrible thing. Cookies. Dr. Osiris. Yeah, there you go. So I guess the last thing I would say is, as far as before you want to open it up to questions, is that if you really want to understand why the mythicist viewpoint has any merit at all, I think you really need to understand the context of when the religion started. And if you understand about Osiris and Romulus and Dionysus and Inanna and Mithras and Zalmoxis and yada, 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 and you understand the failed prophecies and the futility of trying to fight against the Roman Empire, and we can't these military messiahs aren't going to win against these guys. We need a spiritual messiah instead. I think it makes a lot more sense how this idea caught on.
One of the things I discuss in the video that's going to be released on Friday, if I can ever get it finished editing it, I'm a little behind on editing. I'm going out of town tomorrow. I won't be back until Friday, and I may end up working on this while I'm on vacation in order to get it out in time. But one of the things I talk about is the Ascension, and that if you give it any thought, the Ascension makes absolutely no sense. Because a physical person, if this is supposed to be Jesus in a physical body cannot survive going up into space.
Right.
And if it's a spiritual body, what's the purpose of sending it up, in the Ascension? Why not just have it disappear?
Around here.
Or why is there even supposed to be an empty tomb if Jesus' resurrected body was just a spiritual body? That makes no sense either.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what does make sense is that in first century Rome, there were lots of mythologies about the gods living in the clouds. And that was a very common idea, that the gods live in the clouds. And so from that perspective, the Ascension makes perfect sense, because Jesus is simply going up into the clouds because that's where the gods live, in the cloud realm.
Yep. And the whole idea of the, like one of Paul's letters, he mentions like someone he knew traveled up to the third heaven and saw paradise, and they think it might be him talking about himself.
Yeah, I always thought he was talking about himself, because then he immediately goes into the thorn in the flesh.
Right. In my story, that's James. So he goes to visit Peter and James, and Peter's like, hey, he doesn't like to talk about it, but James went up to the third heaven. He's the one. So Peter and James started the whole thing because they had revelations. And so this all took place up in the third heaven, where this archangel that's mentioned in the Ascension of Isaiah. Are you familiar with that one? Yeah. And Paul quotes in one of his letters some things pretty directly from the Ascension of Isaiah. So again, that's not necessarily evidence. It's more about the lack of evidence for the historical guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think, I'm sure Carrier told you, I would imagine he did, that when he went into this, he thought the mythicists were like flat earthers.
Oh, really? When he first considered that, I was not aware of that.
Yeah, he talks about it in his on the Historicity of Jesus, that he developed this Bayesian statistical methodology to determine the likelihood of any historic event. He had written Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ.
I have that one, and I have Jesus from Outer Space, but I do not have the one on Jesus,
on the Historicity of Jesus.
Historicity, right.
So he had some college debt, after he got his doctorate, and no one was hiring. So he had a crowd fund. I'll, investigate any topic you want, vote with your money. And they overwhelmingly voted on, was Jesus a historical person? And he thought, oh my God, this is going to be the easiest, whatever amount of money he owed. He thought this is going to be the easiest money I ever made, because those people are crazy. Until he started looking at the evidence, and he's like, oh my God, there's no. So I appreciate that, because for somebody to change against their bias is a lot more impressive to me than somebody who already believes what they believe going in, and then they only look for the evidence that confirms and very conveniently overlook the evidence that is in disagreement. So
and that's the entire shtick of Lee Strobel and Detective, suddenly his name slips my mind, even though I've talked about him so many times. Gosh, why can't I think of his name? I've talked about him so many times. Cold Case Christianity.
Okay.
There we go. J. Warner Wallace.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Cold case Christianity.
Yeah, he says that he was a detective and that, you know, he was an atheist and that he examined the claims of Christianity as a detective would, and using his skills as a cold case detective, that he found that the claims of Christianity were true. But there's a lot of problems with his methodology. And Prophet of Zod, are you familiar with Prophet of Zod?
I've heard the name. Yeah.
He's a he's a YouTuber that used to do atheist content. Now he does a combination of political content and atheist content. He's kind of broadened his horizons a bit. But he examined the timeline of what Wallace published himself and what was published about him, and determined that he didn't become a cold case detective until at least a decade after he became a Christian. And he said, "How did you use your skills as a cold case detective when you weren't a cold case detective yet?"
So you remember we went back and forth about the Kurt Wise Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a terrifying example of what you just described, because that guy was an award-winning geologist.
Mm.
And he had so much cognitive dissonance because the earth could only be 7,000 years old. And he did what Jefferson did about, he cut out of the Bible everything that was in conflict with modern science.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Jefferson, he cut everything out that was anything that appeared supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
He took out, the stuff, the miracles and whatever, because he felt it was a good roadmap for morality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in the Library of Congress, right? Because that was his
The Jefferson Bible, yes.
personal library. He donated to the library, to the government. That became the Library of Congress, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Kurt Wise kind of did the same thing, but he decided when he was left with not very much that science must be wrong. And that so he's a young earth creationist. And just recently something popped up. They have this thing called creationist paleontology.
Yeah. I've seen some of that.
It's just like, how does a mind go in that direction? I don't know. I'm sure you've heard, you can't reason somebody out of a belief that they weren't reasoned into.
That's interesting.
Right? They just hold on to their beliefs. They don't have beliefs. Their beliefs have them,
I was reasoned out of my faith.
How did that happen?
It was RNR Raw that did it. And it was because I was deep into the faith, although I was not a young earther. I was an old earther. But there was a lot of things that I held compartmentalized. And what I believed about religion was in one compartment, and what I learned in other subjects was in a different compartment. And I almost never compared what the two of them were.
Yeah.
And RNR Raw was giving a speech at the Ark protest, and he said, "We know that Noah's Ark didn't happen. Not just that it couldn't happen, but that it didn't happen. And we know this from geology, biology, genetics, history." And I don't remember what else he listed, because as soon as he said the word history, it just all clicked.
Yeah.
And I suddenly thought about everything I had learned about ancient civilizations and the flood, and they didn't work together.
Yeah. No, interesting.
And obvious, it was obvious to me that what I had learned about ancient civilizations was true, and what was in the Bible about the flood was not true. And my faith went up like a poof of smoke.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never had one little event that sort of happened. It was just a little over.
There were a lot of things that led to that moment.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a single moment.
Yeah, like a Eureka moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
I heard some guys say Eureka is the wrong way. No discovery ever happened with a Eureka. It usually happened with, that seems strange. And then, why did these results come out completely opposite of what I thought? and then let me look into that, and then we were wrong about this all along, but I still like those aha moments anyways. So again, I could go on and on. What else? You said you had some other questions?
Yeah, I have a list of questions here. I need to take care of something in the chat though first. There's someone that has made a very rude comment.
Oh,
and if he comes back, please time him out for the maximum amount of time that you can. I do not want him back on the show.
Sure.
Okay. My first question was, what reaction have you gotten from the book, particularly from believers? Have you had any believers that have commented on the book?
Definitely. One is a very close friend who agreed to kind of read as I was writing over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's going to challenge your faith. And she said, oh, I think we should be able to be challenged. And she has been challenged. And I don't know that I was very, very concerned about this because I was afraid of making people hopeless,
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody reads this and says, yeah, it's all, made up, then what do we fall back on? And for me, I don't know if you caught this in my book, I was trying to replace religion with music because so often, me personally, but the people I know tell me that the most connected they feel to other people is when they're at a concert with 20,000 other people singing along. When you have that experience where you get goosebumps and you get kind of overwhelmed, like that's a religious experience for many people. Mm-hmm. So, and I've experienced that so many times since I was a kid. But I don't know that I to answer your question, like, what do the believers say? I think some people have such an ability to not ingest the things that are going to challenge their beliefs. And so they just move on to the next part. Kind of like that Kurt Wise guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
No matter what, some people are not going to let it move from one compartment to the other, right? Like the term you used about compartmentalization. But I do hope some people say, what the heck is he saying here? And then as they continue to read, going, is that what he's saying there? I'm going to have to read the Bible and see for myself. And then I think they're going to have that same, description that you did about the Ascension. Was that when we were live or before that you talked about the Ascension, how it doesn't make
sense? We were live when we talked about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I hope that some people will read my book and then come to your podcast or read Carrier's book or Dr. Walsh's book to say, if they're curious enough, if I stimulate their curiosity, hopefully they'll go to you guys for answers, understanding that there really is no clear-cut yes or no, right? There's so much that we'll just never know. And then it comes down to either belief by virtue of faith or, well, let's use Carrier's methodology and assign a probability of likelihood, And, he says it's 1 in 3 that he is a real person.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So he's not saying we definitely know he wasn't.
Right. Yeah. I have noticed that he does not say that. Yeah.
But that means there's a 2 in 3 chance he's not.
Right. So, okay. I did not catch this comment immediately, and the comments tend to be a little bit behind, but Jesus Tales is asking Isaac Asimov, but I'm not sure what he's referring to that you said. Do you know what he's referring to?
I've read some of his stuff when I was a kid. He was a science fiction writer.
Yeah, I did too. Jesus Tales, flesh out your question a bit more. What are you specifically asking about Isaac Asimov? Okay, and there's a comment here that I really want to talk about. Oops, that's not the right one. And it's this one from Kaina Tiona. I'm a far more hopeful person without religion than I ever was with it. Religion doesn't give hope, it prevents it.
Mm,
And I am 100% with you on that one.
yeah, interesting.
Especially as a woman.
Mm,
Because when I was in the faith, I always believed that I was a lesser being and
mm,
that I was created to be supportive of my husband and
mm,
my family, and that was my role in life. And I've talked about this a number of times that as an atheist going to the grocery store and the first time looking at the cookies and saying, "What do I want?" And that was such a strange experience,
wow, that's
thinking about my own wants, that I can want something too.
interesting. That's yeah, interesting. Um, yeah, I feel like we shouldn't need reward in the afterlife to be hopeful. We should just be grateful for what we have while we're here.
Mm.
But that's easier said than done for many people. Like a lot of people need a reason to do the right thing, and they need that fear of punishment if they get caught. Um,
Well, I made a comment about that in a video that I made where I talked about a study, a study that was psychology and the moral development. And that's actually the lowest form of moral development. That is considered an age 3 to 7-year-old moral development.
yeah,
When you get older, it's more of righteousness and justice, and an adult way of reasoning for um, is looking at what's best for society, what's best for people. It's personal ethics. That's what I was trying
yeah,
to think of.
yeah.
Is yeah.
And the
And
idea
so
of
to me, that using that as a moral compass is crippling you and leaving you at a child's level of reasoning.
well, I think that's why they indoctrinate you at such a young age, because they want to get you while you are a child and get you to believe in shame and redemption only through the sacraments. I'm talking as a Catholic, because that's what I was raised in. I think I mentioned in my email to you how I was a left-handed, but the nuns knocked that out of me. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's a
uh,
shame. That happened to my dad too.
yeah, I got over it, but I agree.
My dad just switched back. They
To
finally gave up.
gave up. He switched back out
He
of.
switched back to being left-handed, and they
Oh,
finally gave up on trying to make him right-handed.
no kidding. Yeah. Well, the other thing for me was all my older brothers had gloves on their left hand, so I had to learn how to throw with my right. So the nuns made me do my penmanship with my right hand, and my older brothers made me learn how to throw with my right hand.
Mm.
But it helped me when I'm on the basketball court because I can go left or right. They don't know how to guard me. Um, I will say two other things, and before in case I forget, before we run out of time, I heard you mention Toni Morrison on one of your
Mhm.
podcasts.
Mhm.
Do you know her quote about if you want to read a book and it hasn't been written yet, then you need to write it yourself?
No, I'm not familiar with that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
only learned that like 6 weeks ago, but
Mm.
that's entirely why I wrote my book, because I kept as I said, I watched these podcasts. People would ask questions, and the expert would say, we're never going to know, and I'd only be speculating, and I can't speculate. So I had all those same questions. I decided to write a book myself and see if other people were going to be, hey, that makes sense, or no way, I could do a better job. And then the other thing I wanted to throw out there, are you familiar with Yuval Noah Harari and his book Sapiens?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, big. I think it sold 25 million copies, and it's all about what separated us, sapiens. That's why it's called Sapiens, because we coexisted with four other types of humans at various times, including
Right.
the Neanderthals. Yeah.
Mhm.
So his book basically details how the stories that we could tell that allowed us to collaborate beyond our family or our tribe or our lineage is what allowed us to outcompete those other humanoids, but every other species.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, we're at the top of the food chain in such a short period of time, and our insecurity at that, we never really got over. And that's why we haven't been able to kind of temper that and treat the planet, like we should if we want to be around for another 1,000 years, right? But that said, I saw him do a Google Talk. Are you familiar with Google Talks?
I have not watched any, but I know that it exists.
Yeah, they're like a TED Talk, but for like an hour.
Oh, okay.
And they generally, and then they take questions from the audience. Google brings these people in to talk to their employees. I would highly recommend that because he talks about a couple of his books, including Sapiens. And the moderator asks him after halfway in, 20 minutes in, he says, so if these are all fictions, is there any room for God in this? And his answer, settled 30 years of my own searching about, am I an atheist? Am I a believer? Right. And he basically said, if you're sitting around the fireplace looking up at the sky and you're like, there's no way this could possibly be random, collections of gases. There's got to be something up there, right? And you want to call that God, fine. But we can never know the mind of that God.
Okay? Or if it has a mind.
Right. But religion pulls a sleight of hand, and I had a revelation. God told me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's where religion gets in the way of people's spirituality, I guess. Right? And so I've definitely had a whole bunch of people, to answer your earlier question about the impact my book has had on believers. I can't tell you how many people have said, well, I'm more spiritual than religious, not because of my book, but because of what happened to religion over the last 60 years and how they treat women and homosexuals and the pedophile priest thing, all of that. Like, they don't want to take it out on God that the institution was so corrupt.
Right.
And so, Harari, I find, has a great skill in being able to boil down very complex issues to 2 or 3 minutes of, a chapter in a book, or the sum up the last paragraph of a chapter where he just like, oh my God, how did I not see this, So, I just wanted to throw that out there, seeing as how we only have 12 minutes left. But whatever else, if you have any questions or your...
Well, my next question was, you've talked a lot about how mythology is incorporated into the Bible. And I imagine you've heard of Derek Landry. And you've probably watched some of his channel is Myth Vision.
Oh, Derek Lambert.
Lambert. I'm sorry. I do that all the time. Landry is actually one of my son's favorite authors, and I mix up those two names all the time.
Yeah. No, Derek Lambert. Yeah, very familiar with him. Yep.
And did he have any influence on the book?
Well, certainly his guests. Yeah. I mean, that's where I discovered... I don't think I discovered Carrier there, but I definitely discovered Dr. Walsh there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
how about Dr. Miller?
Yes. Yep. What's his first name? Stephen? No.
I don't remember.
He's bald, and his son would I've seen it. I have to say that one of the more interesting guests I found, Steve Mason. I really found his interviews with him very helpful. And this was, again, before I started to write my book, right? These are all the research I did. He had James Tabor on one time, James Tabor. Yeah. This was really interesting. I watched the thing about, I would love to see Derek or you talk to James Tabor about specifically this, because I think you could dedicate a whole episode to it. David Koresh with the Branch Davidians. They were holed up for like 60 days after the initial attempt to, get in there. They were kind of a siege, right, for like 60 days. During that time, the FBI negotiator knew they were listening to a specific radio station. And this FBI guy had gone to school with James Tabor, like years before. So this is 30 years ago, right? That the whole thing at Waco happened. Well, prior to that, this guy had gone to school with Tabor, and he had Tabor go on to that show, that radio show. And they kind of was a bait and switch thing. Koresh was convinced the end of the world was coming. So Tabor had him write the signs, the 7 signs of the apocalypse, and he was going to analyze them. He was trying to negotiate with him, get him to either, surrender or maybe distract him enough that the FBI could go in. I don't know, but they went in before he got past the 3rd or 4th sign. But I would love to see what David Koresh came up with as his modern, interpretation of the signs of the apocalypse. Do you know that the latest end date is 2050?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Do you know Paula Fredrickson?
No.
She's also a biblical scholar. She wrote this book. I saw her at the Harvard bookstore, Ancient Christianities.
Uh-huh.
This is a good one too. So I went and saw her, and she said that the latest calculation is 2050. And I said, wow, that far away? Like, this was in October. And she said, I'm not going to talk about the election, because we were just a few weeks away, but they keep moving the goalposts, I don't think that'll ever go away, but yeah. So what else? Any other ones? Did I answer that question?
One thing I wanted to bring up is that in the book, you have the Gospels bearing the names that they do now.
Yeah.
And yet when I talked to, when I listened to Ehrman, he says that there's no evidence that those names were on there until about 180 CE. So why did you put the names on there?
Just so that the readers could understand that Luke and Luchia, who were composing the Gospel of Luke, are reading Mark and Matthew's Gospels to tell the right story, right? Like they think, Matthew, I think everyone, it's pretty much consensus that Mark was first and Matthew knew, was reading Mark and putting his spin on it. And then Luke read the two of them. Yeah, they weren't called Mark and Matthew at the time, but that's a literary device, I think you would call what I did there, so that the reader would understand that they're sitting with scrolls or codices saying, oh, I like this, I don't like that. Let's, I'm going to put my own spin on it. I find that somebody could write a long book about those things. But I guess, and, there's this conflict or this balance between entertaining and educating. And I'm trying to do a little of both, but I feel like people are much more, and I kind of learned this from one of my editors, like people don't want to be lectured to, right? You got to get them, you got to entertain them. And hopefully if they're curious enough, then they'll come to you and the Myth Vision guy and History Valley. I'm going to be on with Jacob Berman soon. He's the History Valley host. I don't know if you know him.
I've heard of him, but I have not watched him.
Yeah. So
there's so many people to watch.
Yeah, no, exactly. And but I think you guys are doing a great service for people who are interested in this. I'm hoping that my book will take off and bring far more interest to people like you. And I think it'll shake things up a little, that it will generate some more interesting conversations. because I think there's some stagnation, that we kind of rehash the same things over and over a lot to some degree. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I know that I don't watch as much RNR Raw as I used to because he does tend to go to the same talking points a lot, except when he does his science videos. Those are always fresh.
I gotcha.
And so when I see a new science video up, I go watch that right away.
Yeah, and I hope, I'm not saying I'm right because I don't know, nobody knows, but I'm looking forward to somebody else writing their own version and say, no, I think this is how the Apostolic Council went, or this is how that conversation with Eusebius, when he forged the, that passage in the Antiquities about Jesus, that whole thing. Like, I don't know if you read that chapter in my book, but, I can see something like this had to have happened for the result to be where we are. But no one really knows. And I definitely took some artistic license in telling my story, but I'm looking forward to other people telling their version of the story,
This is a really good comment. It's hard not to have the same talking points when the excusages haven't had a new argument in centuries.
Very much so. That's an interesting term, excusagist.
That was coined by Mr. Deity, Brian Dalton.
No kidding, huh?
And a number of us have picked up on it and started using it. And he's absolutely right, because they are excusagists. Oh, and Dr. Osiris, thank you very much for the super sticker.
Yeah. So that's as opposed to apologist, right?
Right.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, very good.
Okay, I have one other comment that I wanted to bring up from the book. Is near the end of the book, there's a character that believes in Santa Claus. And I found him to be so like our current Speaker of the House, who believes in young Earth, as I find young Earth and belief in Santa Claus to be about the same.
So I'm glad you caught that, because I don't explicitly say that. I think it's pretty obvious, but what I'm saying is, and I've done this in my personal life, like, hey, so if you had the ideal political candidate and you found out that when he or she, like, they check all your boxes, but when he or she was the governor of this state, wherever, they would shut down, a curfew on all businesses at 11 o'clock, on December 24th. And, the Wi-Fi gets turned off at 11:30. Everyone has to be in bed. And he never says, because Santa Claus is coming, but the other character says, wait a second, this never happened, did it? And the implication that I think obviously got through to you is that, people in power have had some crazier beliefs, including one of, wasn't George W. Bush reading the Left Behind series of books?
I don't recall, but if I had heard that at the time, I would have cheered because I was still a believer back then.
And, I don't know that means we can't elect that guy, but if you have somebody, because I think somebody else on Trump's first cabinet definitely did believe that, Armageddon's coming, or Jesus won't come back until Armageddon. So maybe we nudge that war between Israel and Iran, because at least when the world blows up, Jesus will come back. Like, I don't know that we want that kind of level of belief in our political leaders.
Yeah. And we definitely do have it. There are definitely people who are trying to usher in Armageddon and are trying to push us to war within Israel. Yeah.
So that was the implication there. I'm glad you caught that, because I didn't, it's this, I don't want to spell it out so explicitly, right? But clearly it sunk in. So I'm pleased that you picked that up. So thank you.
Well, we are out of time. I want to let everyone know that next week, my guest is going to be Dr. Kelsey Johnson, and we are going to be discussing her book, Into the Unknown. Dr. Johnson is a professor of astronomy at the University of Virginia. She was recently featured on the Atheist and Christian Book Club, and that's where I was able to meet her. And it's going to be a fascinating show. Peter, thank you so much for coming. It has been an absolute pleasure being able to talk to you.
Well, I certainly enjoyed it. I appreciate you putting the link in there. I hope whoever purchases the book enjoys it, and look forward to any feedback any of you can provide. So thanks, and happy Easter.
Thank you to all of you in the chat. Yeah, go out and buy Peter's book. It is well worth your time.
Cheers.
Live your life.